stretches all the way from the Mississippi River to the shores of Alabama, up through the hills and the Tennessee Valley to the banks of the Cumberland. I was making my way down to Tupelo when I heard that engine fail. I was all alone on the side of the road, out on the Natchez Trail.
When Chuck Mead was a young boy, he and his sister moved with their parents to Lawrence, Kansas. At age 13, he started playing in the family's band, who played country and western. Chuck would also sing songs by Carl Perkins and Elvis. He learned guitar and by high school was playing in bands with friends. While attending the University of Kansas, Chuck still liked rockabilly and country, but was also listening to Nick Lowe, Elvis Costello, Springsteen, even the Ramones. After college, Chuck moved to Nashville and played in the window of Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. Before long, he and Gary Bennett formed BR5-49. Crowds packed in to see them play Roberts on Lower Broadway. They were a huge hit and soon became famous worldwide. A few weeks after seeing him with his current band, the Stalwarts, I had the pleasure of talking with the extremely talented and very, very funny Chuck Mead. You're listening to Frets with DJ Faye. No lessons, no technique info. I just talk to people who play guitar. Stay tuned. Chuck Mead, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. You know, hanging out in my carport.
In the carport?
I got a bunch of rockabilly staying in my little shack out back, is where I usually do all my work, putting up a British rockabilly band.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for doing this today. I want to start with talking about your roots and your early life, but before doing a segue into that, for the listeners, I had the pleasure of seeing Chuck Mead and his band recently here in Missouri as part of a 3-day music festival in the Ozarks, part of the 3rd annual Woodstock Music Fest, hosted by my good friends, Rick and Nancy Wood. And something interesting about the location, it was not that far from the town where you were born, Nevada, Missouri.
It was not, and I thank you for pronouncing it correctly.
I only know that. I learned that long ago because a good friend of mine in high school, his parents were from Nevada.
Oh, really? Possibly. My mom went to school with them.
Yeah, I learned that early on. Well, you were born in Nevada, but pretty early on, you guys made the move to Lawrence. Is that right?
Well, I never actually lived in Nevada.
Oh, you were just born there. Okay.
I was born there. My mom had her doctor down there, and so she felt more comfortable going back. That's where she's from. Even though, you know, I've always lived in either Kansas or Tennessee. I lived in Overland Park real early on, when it was farmland, really. And but we moved to Lawrence in 1970.
Oh, okay. Well, I understand your mom and your grandparents had a radio show in the 1940s.
Yeah, my mom and my 2 uncles and my grandma and grandpa were part of a radio station there in Nevada, KNEM, and they had, you know, the local barn dance show that they had in a lot of little radio stations. And, you know, it was a 30-minute show, and 15 minutes was the Wines family. And that's my mom's maiden name, WYNES. And, yeah, they did that all the way late 40s, early 50s. And then they started getting in high school and doing other activities, and they just kind of set it aside. But they played all, you know, gospel and old hillbilly and Western songs.
Yeah. So the songs played on that show were probably your first exposure to music, or some of your first exposure.
Well, yeah, and then then they would pull the guitars out at family gatherings. My uncle graduated high school in 1959, so he was a bit of a rock and roller and drove fast cars and played guitar. And when I was little, I thought my grandpa and uncle wrote all those Hank Williams songs. Then in 1970 or so, 71, they decided to put together a dance band to play at different functions, different like rural water and electric association down in Southwest Missouri. They get a gig doing that for their annual convention, and all the farmers that got the water, they get prizes, and there was a show. And I got a drum kit for my 12th birthday, and I became the drummer. And wow. It was my mom and my uncle and my grandpa and my dad played bass. They taught my dad to play bass because the other bass player flaked out somehow, and my dad always would show up. He was there anyway, And so then we played those rural electric functions, but then we also played, the antler circuit, moose lodges, and elks and eagles,
right?
Knights of Columbus, and some honky tonks. So I grew up in the 70s playing every Friday and Saturday. I had money in junior high, man. Just playing gigs. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the guests who've been on this show started out on drums and either added or switched to guitar as an instrument.
Well, yeah, I switched, but I played drums until I switched over when I was in high school. I mean, my uncle taught me how to play guitar. He just passed away.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
2 weeks ago. Yeah. We just got back from the funeral. It was great. He was a great guy. My dad stopped playing bass, so I played bass for a while, and I would get one of my musician friends from Lawrence. So there was someone my age to play drums. And then when my uncle moved down to Texas in late 79, early 80, something like that, then I just kind of took over the lead guitar.
Nice.
And we only played a few times like that, and then we just kind of stopped playing. And I wanted to be in a rock and roll band.
Yeah. Well, in that time period, what were some of your favorite bands? What were you starting to listen to?
Oh, well, I always through the 70s, I listened to, top 40 radio, country music too. But if you remember back then, in the early 70s and mid 70s, you'd hear Kenny Rogers and the Spinners and Waylon Jennings.
Oh, yeah. And
Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods and John Travolta. You hear them all on the same stage.
Right.
You remember that.
Oh,
so yes. I was a big fan of, Billy Don't Be a Hero and Paul, and of course the Beatles. I was way into the Beatles always. And I was way into Elvis always too. I got to see Elvis in 1976, which was a big thrill. I didn't get to see Paul McCartney in Wings though, and I still really wanted to see that show. But yeah. I eventually got to see him later on.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But to me, the Beatles were the best rockabilly band to ever come out of England.
Oh, yeah. They were playing all kinds of country and Western in the early days.
Oh, they knew all that stuff, even later on, But, I was at Carl Perkins' house one night, and we were playing guitars, and he said, "Hey, look over there." And it was framed on his wall were 4 cards to the Carl Perkins fan club, and they were all the Beatles.
Oh, wow.
Signed.
That's great.
Yeah, it really is. It's really cool. But so but then I always liked some of the AOR radio rock. I wasn't too into like Styx or Foreigner or any of that crap. I liked Bruce Springsteen.
Oh yeah.
But then when the punk rock came out, when the Ramones came out, and Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe and all those guys, I'm like, well, this is for me.
I was way into Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe, and I was amazed. But just a few months ago, I was able to talk to Brinsley Schwartz, who's been a hero since I was a teen. And
no way.
Yeah, that was the only call. That was the only interview I did from the UK to my little studio in my basement. So, yeah, that was pretty interesting. Huge fan of Elvis Costello, Nick Lowe, Graham Parker, all that stuff. Rockpile.
Man, that British pub rock.
Yeah.
That's the spirit of rock and roll right there.
Ducks Deluxe.
And they got the country music too. NRBQ was probably the American version of that.
Yeah.
And I love those guys too. Although I didn't find out about them until later on. But I just remember one day I was sitting in art class in high school, and it was typical REO Speedway. We were listening to radio while we were drawing, and typical whatever, Kansas, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I hear this voice break through. My gal is red hot. Your gal ain't doodly squatting. It was Robert Gordon and Link Ray.
Yeah.
And I nearly shat myself. Can I say that?
Oh, yeah. It's unfiltered. It's
okay,
uncensored
good.
on this show.
It was a revelation that there was somebody out there, doing that kind of stuff.
It's so great. Yeah.
Because I was into all that 50s stuff, and everybody made fun of me for buying Chuck Berry and Beatles records. You should be buying Rock of the Future.
Exactly.
Boston. And I guess there's something to be said for all those bands. I mean, people really like them. I just was particularly into that kind of thing.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, I want to talk about Plug. Plug makes it easy for you to purchase the personal technology you need at 40 to 70% off retail pricing. What can you get from Plug? Certified pre-owned devices including iPhones, Androids, AirPods, Macs, smartwatches, accessories, and more. I originally didn't even want an Apple Watch, but I got one from Plug and I love it. I wear it every day. Your purchase is backed by their unmatched 1-year warranty and 30-day money-back guarantee. One more very cool thing, Plug is dedicated to helping reduce e-waste around the globe. To date, Plug has helped save over 1 million devices from reaching landfills, and they're looking to double that number by 2025. Link to Plug Tech from the show notes, and check out all the great deals and savings on certified pre-owned devices. Plug Electronics. Check it out. Well, I'm pretty familiar with Lawrence. My wife not only went to University of Kansas, but still pretty obsessed with all things KU. She even part of her childhood lived in Lawrence. But yeah, we'll be out in public. And of course, if she sees someone with KU apparel on, you can bet she's probably going to give them a thumbs up and a rock chalk.
You got to you have to do it.
Yeah.
Because we stick together. Like little clan sticks together.
I know that.
And that happens everywhere too. And when I go back to Lawrence, I have to stop myself because everybody's wearing Jayhawk gear. And I'm like, I don't have to do that here. It's understood.
Yeah.
Like I'm walking around Nashville or in an airport somewhere and I see somebody with a Jayhawk thing. I'm like, rock chalk. And everybody always responds. I've never had nobody not respond.
Yeah. Lawrence is very cool. Mass Street and all that.
It's the center of the universe. I used to say that all the time. And then if you got on Google Earth and just let it go in, like started, descending from space, it would go to the Meadowbrook Apartments in Lawrence, Kansas, because the guy that developed that lived in Lawrence. And forever I was like vilified. I was because I'd always said that Lawrence was the center of the universe, and now it was Google Earth was proving it. But then he moved to Emporia, so now it goes to Emporia.
Interesting.
It's not very nice.
Well, what was the first band? I know that you had the Homestead Grays. Was that kind of the first official band, or did you form any other ones or join any other ones?
Yeah, I had a bunch of guys. We'd get together and play in my basement at first, and I'd get Elks Club gigs because of my but we'd play like a teen dance or something, or a 50s dance.
Elks Clubs were on your resume. You've done all that.
Well, yeah, and I knew the people that booked it in Lawrence because I played there a million times. And we played as the other band because it was my other band. And then I was in a band called The Clean for a while with my good friend, my best friend from high school, and a couple other guys. And we got it from the Beatles, He's very clean.
Oh, yeah, I love that line.
But then I quit that band, and I don't know, I was in a band called Pillbox after that, sort of a mod outfit. And then I was in a band called the Pagan Idols from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we called ourselves the Pagan Idols from Cambridge, Massachusetts, because, if you were a local band, people would like, I don't know, go see those guys. But if you were from out of town, man, they'd come and see it. So we just put Pagan Idols from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Oh, okay, we'll go see those guys. Well, I wonder what that's up. Oh, it's these guys. And it was a country punk power trio.
I like it.
And then I was in a band briefly with some friends of mine who was actually became one of the bass player in Pagan Idols. But anyway, he was in a band called the Blinkies, and it was like a power pop band. But there was a time in Lawrence where I was in like 3 bands, and there was like probably 10 or 12 guys that formed like 4 or 5 different bands. There was there were the Blinkies was the pop band. The Homestead Grays was like the country rockabilly band. And there was a band I was in called Rabbit Scat, which was a surf band. We told people we were from Ocean View, Kansas. And then this other band that I wasn't in, but I'd sit in with them every now and again, which is a reggae band called Poverty Wings. Wow. That was all like that. And we would always play like a bunch of shows, all those bands together. And it would be roughly the same people in different combinations playing. It was pretty great. It was a nice little scene. And then, people move away and gravitate towards other things, but the Grays kind of stayed around.
You guys released a couple records too, Homestead Grays?
Yeah, we did. We had one on Fresh Sounds that Bill Rich, who owned Fresh Sounds, put out the Mortal Micronauts records and a few others. And we did the first record we did was an EP that was produced by Fred Smith, the bass player from Television.
Oh, well, yeah.
Which was a cool thing to meet him. And that was set up by Mona Tipton. Mona Tipton was one of the people that originally started the Bottleneck.
Oh,
it was called Cogburns. It was called Cogburns for a short time. And she and Brett Mosman were partners in that bar, and it became the Bottleneck. And anyway, she was like, had her finger on the pulse. I mean, she had a connection and got Fred Smith to come produce our record. I mean, we paid him and we cut it in Kansas City. I can't remember the name of the studio. It was over there by Union Station. But it was cool, it was great experience working with somebody who had actually been in a real studio before, Then we put another one out that we self-released and recorded called El Supremo, and that was just on a CD. It wasn't on, the other one was just a vinyl, just a vinyl record. It's still around. Every now and again, somebody will put that in front of me to sign. I'm like, wow.
That's great. Well, I know there are times when an artist, a musician, band members can't just support themselves by playing gigs. Am I correct that you once had a job as a movie projectionist?
Oh man, I would still have that job if I had time to do it. And if it existed
cool.
anymore. I started doing it when I was in high school. The first movie I ran was a deer hunter.
Oh,
8 reels long. Yeah.
Pretty heavy.
Yeah, I worked at a triplex where, it was still the old school, I don't know if you know this, and this is getting a little technical and I don't want to bore your audience with it, but
it won't.
In the old days, every movie theater, every house had 2 projectors because reels, shipping reels, they were like 15 or 20 minutes long. And then you'd have to change over to another reel. And you could tell it, the reels at the end, you used to be able to tell them. They've kind of cut them out now, but there was these little Q dots that appeared in the top right-hand corner of the screen. They were 6 seconds apart. And the object is you've threaded it up, 24 frames, 6 seconds. There's numbers on the leaders. You thread it up to 6 seconds. When you see the first Q dot, you turn the machine on, pull the preliminary dowser. And when the next Q dot comes, you step on a switch that switches over the image and the optical sound to the other projector, and nobody in the audience knows anything happened. The movie just continues.
Pretty seamless, yeah.
Yeah, well, if it's done right.
Right.
But I ran a triplex. It was 3 movies, and there was 2 of them were automated, but they were just semi-automated. I still had to be there to pull the dowser down so the image came on the screen in time. But theater 1 was a hand crossover. They still had that. They had a carbon arc lamp at the theater in Lawrence, at the movie drive-in movie theater in Lawrence. That's old school lighting, not a xenon bulb. Now I'm getting really technical and boring. But it was a great job. I spent a lot of time watching a lot of movies and writing songs. I play guitar up in the booth. No one could hear me in the theater. Just,
right.
You know what I mean? I'd be real quiet because you had to keep an eye on the films.
Yeah.
I still have anxiety dreams sometimes that I'm in the booth and there's a movie starting and there's something on the rewind and this and there's a film break and it's all happening at once.
Now, wasn't that sort of the subject of that Cinema Paradiso, the film?
Oh man, I ran that movie.
Oh yeah, so you were the projectionist on that movie.
Yeah, when at Liberty Hall, I ran it at Liberty Hall.
That's very cool.
I eventually became. I kind of stopped doing it for a year or so. It was easy to get off work at a movie theater to go play gigs. Like if I was traveling and I'd be gone for a little while, I could always just cover my shift. I'll be back, and it was pretty. And I didn't do that much road work back then, but yeah, I loved that job. And I even tried to get a job down here in Nashville when I first moved down here. In fact, I did. And I kept it up until I just didn't have time to do it anymore. And now there's no projections at all. They
Right.
press a button and it's a digital.
Yeah, it's a different world.
For a while they had platters where you'd get the film. They save a lot of money on shipping because those are heavy. You can get a movie that has, like 6 reels and they're in these metal canisters and they were heavy and you had to take them all the way up stairs to the booth,
Wow. A workout.
And and then put the new previews on. It was always pretty exciting though, but I ran a lot of movies in the 80s, almost every movie you can think of. Raiders of the Lost Ark. I ran Caddyshack for 8 weeks. Airplane. I remember when Airplane came out. It took everybody by surprise.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films of that era that I ran was in 1980. There's a movie called The Long Riders. You ever see that film?
Oh yeah.
It's about Jesse James and it stars the Keach brothers as Frank and Jesse James and
Stacey
the Carradine
Keach.
brothers and the Carradine brothers were the younger brothers. And Ry Cooder did the music for it.
That's right. That's right.
I have that record. It's so good.
Coffee on the wall, working for the man just the way my daddy done. But the money I'm making ain't buying much bacon, but when payday comes along, sometimes I gotta do something even if it's wrong. The telephone keeps ringing and it gets under my skin.
Well, once you got to Nashville, I mean, in the early days, or at least at one point, you were playing like solo up in Tootsie's Orchid Lounge in the window for a while.
Yeah, I kept that gig too. I mean, even when I was playing, I would play Tootsie's on Sunday afternoons and Monday nights, late night. And I would take Tuesday off and then Wednesday through Saturday I'd play at Roberts with the band. Yeah, I kept playing at Tootsie. That was my first job. That was my goal, was coming down here and work at Tootsie's.
I have a Tootsie story.
Good.
Yeah, in the early 2000s, I stopped for just one night in Nashville, making my way to Knoxville. And I had already discovered Tootsie's on previous Nashville trips and loved it. So I checked into the hotel and had already planned to hit Roberts and Tootsie's, but Tootsie's was actually the first stop. So I'm there listening to this really great band playing. It's a nice evening, the doors open, and all of a sudden Mel Tillis appears in the doorway. And of course, everyone in the bar cheers, and the band had no idea he would just happen to show up, but they coaxed him up on stage to sing a number. And maybe that happened. It probably happened a lot, but it was just like, wow, I had no idea something like that was going to happen. My one night that I stopped on my way to Knoxville. So. You
always feel lucky when stuff like that happens. Yeah, man, it happens a lot. That's how I met Marty Stewart.
Oh, wow.
I have a picture of the second that Marty Stewart and I met because I was playing at Tootsie's in the afternoon. I'd fill in the afternoon sometimes too, just because I needed a gig, early on. And I was up there doing my thing, and Marty comes flitting through the bar with a T&N film crew, taking people on a tour of Lower Broadway. And I'm like, after I finish the song, what do you want to hear, Marty? He's like, play a little Dixie Fried, kind of testing me out, obscure Carl Perkins number. And I went into it. And the next thing I knew, Marty came up on stage and he was playing the left hand on the guitar and I was playing the right hand.
I love that.
I'm like, this is why I moved to Nashville.
Well, Lower Broadway is much different than it was prior to bands like yours. I think not that I was down there a lot before all those days, but I guess it seems like it was really kind of breathing some life into it after bands like yours or people like you went down there and started playing. I don't know.
Yeah, there wasn't much going on down there at all.
Yeah.
After the Opry moved away, and I would come through town, like the Grays would come through town and we'd play at Elliston Square, which is now a place called the End or the Exit Inn.
Oh, the Exit Inn. I love the Exit Inn. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are the places that we'd play, but we'd always go down to Tootsie's Orchid Lounge and Ernest Tubb Record Shop and the Lawrence Brothers Record Shop next door. And I was always like, God, why isn't this the happening street? I mean, look, it's happening. And so when I moved down, my goal was to get a gig at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge because, and it was usually when I first came down, people were like, why are you going down there? It's dangerous. And it was like, yeah, it's kind of fucked up down there. It was like the Reaper Bond. There were peep shows and European tourists who weren't, didn't know any better. But it was cool, and the bars, there weren't any bands on our side of the street. It was always just one person in the window. And across the street, they would have bands at the Music City Lounge. And that was kind of the rougher side of the street across the street. The Say Win 2, which means there was another bar called the Say Win somewhere else in town. But they served $1.50 Bush and a fight. And that was a rough place. And the Turf, those were kind of like Celinda Pink played over there. It was kind of a blues. But our side of the street was a little more hillbilly. And there really wasn't any bands playing until BR started playing in the window. Robert Moore, who ran Roberts, had run Tootsie's for years. And he kind of got a little bit screwed out of Roberts' business and was taken over by, some of the people that run it now. And Robert, back then, there was only taverns. You could only buy beer down there. And Robert decided he would, compete with Tootsie's a little bit. And he was running this place called the Rhinestone, which just sold Western wear and saddles and gun belts and tourist trinkets and shit. And he just set up a bar, got a beer license, which you could do easy, and put a little stage in the front. And that was it. He was in business.
Wow.
But I remember when we were playing there early on, and I was playing at Tootsie's, and this other guy, Gary Bennett, showed up in the street about the same time. And he started working at Roberts. And Robert put together a band for Gary on the weekends. And that was the first band that played down there on that side of the street, really. And one night the guitar player couldn't make it. So Gary came down to Tootsie's and was like, hey, you want to play guitar this weekend with me? Because we were kind of doing the same thing. We were the only ones doing like Ray Price and, Johnny Horton and stuff that people had kind of forgotten about down there. And I'm like, sure, I didn't really play lead guitar, but I do it. And it sounded so good the first night that the other guy never did come back.
Wow.
But, so then that was kind of the start of it. And then there were some times when Gary and I were just kind of getting used to each other and singing, because we sang harmony as kind of like we had a brother vibe. In fact, our band was almost called the We Ain't Brothers, because people would always go, you guys brothers? No, we ain't brothers. And which would have been we would have been able to explain our name better than trying to explain BR5-49 to a German DJ.
Yeah, I thought it was a perfect name.
Yeah, it was. It really was. But yeah, so, there were some times when I'd play like the 6 to 9 shift or 5 to 9 shift, and he played the 9 to 2 shift, and we'd both play both shifts and then go over the turf and sing for a while just to kind of get used to playing together. And then we had the band on the weekends, and then pretty soon it became Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I talked Shaw into moving down from Lawrence to be the drummer because we couldn't find a steady drummer. I'm like, dude, you need to see this. It's a circus. I mean, really, it was just like you couldn't make up what was happening down there. All the people that were originally down there. It was just a freak show. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Ladies of the night, peep show workers, construction workers, homeless people, ex-country stars that are now degenerates living on the street.
I love it down there. I like sitting upstairs at Roberts, like that little bar, like looking down toward the stage where the band's playing.
Well, they call it the Showbud balcony, but when we were there, we called it the Johnny Horton balcony.
Johnny Horton balcony.
In fact, we called it a different star balcony every night. A lot of times, it's a little bit too crazy down there for me now. It's just like it used to be that the bars were just between 4th and 5th Avenue, and now it goes all the way from 5th down to the river, and it's just wall to wall, spring break.
Yeah.
And it's like most of the bands down there, they just play what you can hear in any bar band in anywhere. It's not, there was a high water mark where it was, pretty happening down there, really happening. And people were still going down there to see country music. And then it just started to be, destined. And now it's like, bachelorette parties with their penis shaped straws that don't tip.
I went with,
but I don't want to be disparaging of it because, I still, every now and again, I'll get the call to play at Roberts, sit in for somebody. And it's fun. It's like 4 hours.
Years ago, some friends of mine and I went to Exodus to see Steve Earle and the Dukes. God,
all right.
I think that was like maybe late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know. But of course, after that, we staggered over to the end after the show. It was something down there.
Well, that was cool. That was the Rock Block down there. And they've torn down a lot of those places now. Like the Gold Rush. The Gold Rush was always like the last place you stopped. It was the third place a lot of times. And it's not there anymore.
Remember when we hung in the low places in 1979? We used to think that it mattered to the man with the money where we spend our time. Oh, well, I knew a little gal with a mohawk hairdo, a chain around her neck. Oh, but you never recognize her if you saw her now. She does something that you never expect. She done traded in the docks for kicker boots, safety pin t-shirts for man wears suits. Her hair's grown out and it's piled up high. She only shows her tattoos one at a time. She ain't ashamed of the way she was. She hears old Hank, she can't get enough. Her punk rock records are gathering dust. Cause little Ramona's gone hillbilly nuts.
Hey, this is Chuck Mead, and you're listening to Frets with DJ Faye. He'll talk your ear off.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
I was born on the breeze, raised beneath the trees, and the night the courthouse burned, they lost my name.
While living in Columbia, Missouri, Deke Dickerson formed the much-loved garage rock band The Untamed Youth. He was 17. In the early 90s, Deke moved to LA and has enjoyed great success as an excellent guitarist. He has a regular column in Guitar Player, has written several books on guitar. He's even scored and contributed songs to film soundtracks.
I look back on it now, I'm like, wow, I would have thought I was a total weirdo if I wasn't me. But, I grew up in the 70s, and all my friends were listening to Kiss and Led Zeppelin, and somehow or another, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I just got turned on to 50s rock and roll, and something about it just kind of latched on. And then, of course, later on, when I started playing guitar, got into guys like Chuck Berry and Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps and Eddie Cochran and all those kind of people. And it just kind of exploded from there.
Hope you'll check out my talk with Deke on Frets.
Started from good seed, but got swallowed by the weeds. Go tell your mom you're fooling with a wild, wild thing.
BR5-49 had well over 100 appearances on the Grand Ole Opry. I wish I would have experienced the original Ryman Auditorium. I have done like the backstage tour of the current location, which is, the place is just a beautiful space. But yeah, I love that whole history of the original auditorium.
Well, you know, it wasn't the original. And in fact, it's been at the Opry House longer than it was at the Ryman now. The original place was the WSM Air Studios.
Oh, okay, right.
And when they started having people coming in, you know, and watching them play through the glass, they like set up some chairs, and then it got to be too popular, and they moved it to a place over here in a place called the Bell Court, which is a movie theater now. It has been forever, and they had it there for a while, and then they had it at the War Memorial, but it was a little bit too rowdy for the staid people at the War Memorial, and they moved it over here to East Side, to a little tabernacle on the east side that was just really ramshackle. That doesn't, you know, building isn't there anymore. And they didn't move into the Ryman until the 40s.
Oh, well.
But that is the place everybody knows as, you know, the mother church of country music.
Right.
There is no doubt about that. And it's always great to go back and play the Opry when it's there. Counting BR, I've played the Opry well over 180 times now,
wow.
Probably. 170, 180 times. Yeah, I get called. I just played it 2 weeks ago. I just played it. It's always an honor to get to play that show. I mean, I love getting the call.
Well, after BR5-49, you released your first solo album, Journeyman's Wager. What was the lineup of musicians on that record? Were there people from BR5-49 on that, I think?
Well, the last incarnation of BR5-49 was Shaw Wilson, who was the drummer, and Donnie Heron, and Mark Andrew Miller, who is playing with me to this day.
Yeah.
And that was the one that did the last BR record, which was called Dog Days, that we did down in Athens, Georgia, with a producer named John Keane, who was really great. He worked with REM, and he worked with Widespread Panic a bunch, and he's just a great guy. And also he knows T. Graham Brown too really well, because T. Graham, that's where he's from down there. And so the lineup on that was, you know, I really didn't have a steady band. I played with just whoever I called up, but Mark was always the guy. Mark was always the bass. Mark Horn was the drummer on that record. Mark Horn had been in the Derailers, and he was also in this notable band in New York called the Blue Chieftains. They were pretty famous. And he's a great drummer, but then he just kind of stopped doing it, moved away. But that was, you know, Marky played bass on most all that. Dave Rowe was one of the musicians on that. Mike Henderson played on that first record too. They had him come in and do some stuff. And Jim Hoke played some horns along with John Tiven, and Jen Gunderman and Audley Freed, who were a married couple, that they play in Sheryl Crow's band now. She was at
Peter Stroud's part of that, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. But Audley's the other guitar player. He played on She Got the Ring, I Got the Finger. He played on that.
Okay.
But Jen played on the whole thing, Jen Gunderman. And she was in the Jayhawks before that, too.
That's right.
Yeah. And Pat Severs, who's a great steel player, great musician, studio guy, who played with Don McLean and a bunch of different people. He was the steel guy on that before. But I'd already played Carco. I've been knowing Carco forever. I mean, he'd come down and sit in with me at Tootsie's when he first moved to town, just to work on his straight steel. It was always pretty cool. But yeah, that was basically the band that I played with mostly was Mark Horn and Mark Andrew Miller and me at that time. And then when I went on tour for that, that's when Marty joined the band, Martin Lenz, who plays with me now.
Nice.
So Marky's been playing with me for about 20 years, and Marty's been playing with me for 15. Yeah, kind of creeps up on me. I can't believe they still stand me. But we, you know, that incarnation we made Back at the Quonset Hut, and we made Free State Serenade and Close to Home.
Wow.
And that's all the ones with Carco on it.
Yeah, Back at the Quonset Hut, the documentary that accompanied that was great. It was really nice to see Harold Bradley talking about the backstory of Bradley Studios. And that was really cool. They even showed pictures of the old space, and I really enjoyed that. It was great. Yeah,
we tried to do it like them, you know. And I'd had a relationship with Bobby Bear because I met him kind of actually through Carl Smith. If you can stand the name dropping.
Name drop away.
I-
That's something else I do all the time.
Well, Carl Smith was like a huge country star. He was like the biggest country star after Hank Williams. He was the big guy on the Opry, and he had tons of hits. And that's Carlene's dad. He was married to June Carter,
Oh, wow.
and Carlene Carter's dad is Carl Smith. That's why she's Carlene. There's another Nick Lowe.
Yeah, they were married for a
Intertwined,
while.
too.
Right. I met
were.
Carlene. Speaking of name dropping, I met her at a house
Oh, yeah.
concert. She's very sweet.
I love her. I know her very well. She actually gave me a few Carl Smith ties that I wear.
Wow.
Like when I play the Opry, I wear a Carl Smith tie. But that's how I got Bobby Bear to be on that Quonset Hut record, is because I met him because I went to go see little Jimmy Dickens do his nightclub act at the Nashville Palace, because he could tell all his blue jokes that he couldn't tell on the Opry. And it was like an afternoon show, and they were filming it and everything. And the guy said, "Oh, I got a table for you right here." And he sits me down right next to Carl Smith and Bobby Bear and their wives, and they're everybody's hammered. It's great. And so when I asked, I'm really good friends with Bobby Jr., who's a great musician too, great songwriter too. He's touring around with Guided by Voices right now.
That's right.
I'm like, "Hey, Bobby, could you get your dad to come down to the Quonset?" I mean, because I had all these guys that he knew, Pig Robbins and Harold Bradley and Bob Moore. And I had them all there on a Saturday afternoon. And do you think your dad would do "Hey Joe" with me, which was a Carl Smith song? And he did. He showed up, and that was just such a supernatural weekend for me. One of those times when I was just waving my union card around. Harold played on almost all that record, man.
Wow.
The rest of those guys were there for that one day, and Buddy Spiker was there too. And it was. And then I mixed them in with my band. Then I had Chris Scruggs and Wes Langlow was, the young guys I brought in because, we were doing it all live. We had to cover everything.
I got a kick out of learning that "Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree" was recorded there.
Oh, yeah. Bebopalula.
Oh, yeah.
Is it in the documentary?
It does show up.
Documentary where he was telling the story about, driving down Music Row and seeing these guys in these striped shirts and these caps, and he thought, wow, the French Navy must be in town. That's what you think the French Navy looks like? And it was Gene Vincent, the Blue Caps.
That's right.
They did that in the basement of before it was even the Quonset Hut. It was just still the boarding house that they put the Quonset Hut on the back of. But anyway, yeah, it was pretty spectacular and groovy record. I really enjoyed doing that.
Well, all right. Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fiddles are squeaking, the guitars are speaking, and piano plays a jelly roll. The man on the drums is far from dumb, and a bass man, he plays from his soul. The tables are quaking and your nerves are shaking, but you keep on begging for more. To keep having your fun, you lucky son of a gun, on the honky-tonk hardwood floor. On the honky-tonk hardwood floor. On the honky-tonk hardwood floor. To keep having your fun, you lucky son of a gun, on the honky-tonk hardwood.
Free State Serenade has a lot of references to Kansas.
Well, that's what that's what I wanted to do, was my love letter to Kansas. And it had songs about my own personal Kansas, and then, a couple of historical songs. I feel like that's probably my best record that I made yet. Yet I could make a better one.
I mentioned my love for Nashville, but I also love making trips down to Memphis. Memphis is a pretty easy trip from St. Louis, but you recorded close to home down there at the Sun Studios.
No, it wasn't the Sun Studios.
Oh, really?
It was the Phillips Studio, which
okay.
is the studio that Sam built in 1962, 61, which is like actually just literally one street over from the old Memphis recording service.
Okay.
But it was like the studio that he built when he had enough money to do what he wanted, because Sam was a radio guy and he was all into sounds and everything. There was only so much you could get in that one room over there at the old place. And this one was like, it's spectacular. And it really has the Sam Phillips spirit in it.
Gotcha.
And all those guys hung out there, Charlie Rich recorded there, Jerry Lee, they recorded Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs.
Oh,
Wooly Bully was recorded at that place. Yeah, man, it's like Memphis, and it had the funk on it. So we wanted to. My buddy Matt Rossbang, who's a great producer, who's produced like John Prine, worked on Jason Isbell records, and Margot Price. He did her first few records. He was running the studio at the time, and so I went over there and cut that with him, and it was just great. Jerry Phillips is hanging around, and it's always good when his knee starts to tap, and you know you're doing something right. And yeah, what a spectacular, vibe that was too.
Yeah. Well, during that surreal pandemic period, I loved your song, I Ain't Been Nowhere, the parody of the Hank Snow song that Johnny Cash made famous with I've Been Everywhere.
Yeah, it's a Hank Snow song. Actually, that song was originally done by an Australian artist whose name escapes me right now. And it was all Australian towns.
Oh, okay.
That he talked about. And Hank Snow said to him, if you write American cities instead of that, I'll cut that.
Huh.
And it was a big hit for Hank in the early 60s. And then Johnny Cash did it, of course.
Right.
People kind of equate that with him now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a band riff, of course, because we started doing the little SOB jamborees every other Saturday. And it was our live stream to keep us occupied, and people sent in tips. It was great. It kept us alive. We were really thankful that people watched us all over the world and sent in money and helped us out. It was really great. But anyway, it was like just a band riff, and we started laughing, and we're like, well, we better write this before somebody else does.
Yeah, there's even a Schitt's Creek reference in there. It's pretty hilarious.
Oh yeah. It's everything that you were watching,
exactly,
Tiger King.
Right. It was great though that a lot of musicians, kind of wasted no time putting out online videos during that. I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
Well, yeah, and I still think that would work in a certain way. I mean, YouTube has TV shows now.
Yeah,
I might also add that Rhonda Vincent cut that song and made a video of "I Ain't Been Nowhere."
Oh wow!
She did like a bluegrass version.
I'll have to check
God
that out.
bless her. Yeah, she could still do it. I don't remember any of the words, but I was at the Opry the other night, and she was like, started rattling them off. I'm like, dang, I didn't even memorize that. That was too weird for me at the time. Can't do that without Crip Notes.
Well, in addition to songwriting, singing, guitar playing, and touring, you co-produced a couple tribute albums for Johnny Cash and one for Waylon Jennings.
I did a couple of tribute records, and Dave Rowe and I produced it. Dave Rowe was a studio bass player extraordinaire. I mean, he was originally from Hawaii and played in, funk bands and punk rock bands and jazz bands. And he was just a great player, was playing with Don Ho's son. He knew Don. But he moved to Nashville in the late 70s, early 80s, I want to say, and started playing with like Charlie Louvin and a bunch of people, and then got a regular gig with Jerry Reed for quite a while. And then he, and Vern Gosden, and then he was just a studio guy too, and played with a bunch of different people, and ended up being Johnny Cash's bass player for the last 20 years of Johnny Cash's touring life. And we got, when was this? It was probably, I want to say 2006, 2007. We took it to the guys at Dual Tone, who I knew from they had been at Arista when BR was on Arista, and actually Dual Tone put out those two BR records, Tangled in the Pines and Dog Days. And we're like, hey, we have an idea to do a Johnny Cash tribute. It was before Johnny Cash became like engraved on a mountain like he is now, but he was still like a divine entity walking the earth at that point. But we were like, hey, we could like do like sort of left of center, what we would call Americana artists now, because Marty Stewart was doing like a mainstream Johnny Cash tribute record. And it was great because they were companion pieces. They weren't like competing. And it was great. We had like Eddie Angel from Low Straight Jackets, had Rosie Flores, and Raul did a song from the Mavericks. And Mandy Barnett and I did Jackson, which was kind of cool.
Nice. And
it was pretty great. And we got really good response on it. And, the band we were the band too, Dave and I and Kenny Vaughn. And then we'd get a drummer for any situation, for a certain situation. Like Shaw played on my track, and we got W.S. Holland played on Hank III's track. W.S. Holland was Carl Perkins' drummer, and then Johnny Cash's drummer. Those were the two drumming gigs he had in his life, Blue Collar. And so there was a certain amount of cred that went along with it. And it was pretty successful. And so we did a Waylon Jennings one, too. So we had, John Doe singing Only Daddy That'll Walk the Line on that one.
That's great.
And Carlene was on that, too. Carlene did I've Always Been Crazy. It was a pretty great experience doing those two records. And it gave me a chance to be on the other side and kind of live like a studio musician. And I learned a lot from Kenny and Dave. And Dave passed away last year very suddenly. And I'm still a little bit lost because he was like my big brother. Those guys were older than me and kind of teaching me the ropes, being very patient.
Well, you're also music director and I guess musical supervisor for the Broadway hit musical $1 Million Quartet and the television show Sun Records.
Yeah, I got this call from Colin Escott, who's a great music writer. I think I was telling you about him. He's written tons of liner notes for like the Bear Family label mostly. And he wrote the definitive Hank Williams biography, very detailed. Great music writer, and he had written this book about the history of Sun Records, and one of the parts of the Sun Records was the part about the $1 Million Quartet, which is, of course, the one and only time that Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash and Elvis were at 706 Union together jamming out. And Sam had a newspaper guy take a photo of it and called them the $1 Million Quartet. Anyway, I got a call from Colin one day saying, "You ever thought about working in the musical theater?" And it just so happened it was, pretty soon after BR broke up. And I was doing some stuff with Robert and Paul from the Mavericks, who were broken up at the time too, called the Hillbilly All-Stars, where we'd travel around with a bunch of knuckleheads and play. And I was getting on a plane somewhere, and Colin sent me the script. He said, "This is $1 Million Quartet." And I'm like, "Well, I know that." And he's like, "Think about trying to be the music director supervisor for this." And I didn't know shit about theater, really. I mean, I was in a play in high school and that's it. And I was in the KU theater department for like a semester. So I didn't even, I had really didn't know what it took. And I met with some of the producers. They wanted it to be authentic rockabilly instead of like, a traditional theater music supervisor putting together arrangements of what they thought was rockabilly, because you put those thumbs in your front pockets and suddenly everything's up to date in Kansas City. They didn't want that. So I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Like I didn't even have an iPod at that point. And when they were doing the reading for it, I was like sticking CDs in a boom box, for place holders.
Wow.
But I learned a lot, we did a couple of working productions, one in Daytona Beach and one in Issaquah, Washington, 2007. And in 2008, we went to Chicago and put it up in Chicago, all professional. And it ran for 8.5 years.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And then we went to Broadway and it was there for a couple of years. And we went to the West End of London. It was there for a year, 5 years of a national tour. It was, it was a pretty great experience. And I learned a whole lot. And we even did a follow-up. Now there's a $1 Million Quartet Christmas show.
Oh, wow.
That we put up on tour the last couple of years. It's not on tour this year, but it's around, it's in the licensing world. So, yeah, it's a good experience. And, now I've done a couple other shows. I've done a Ring of Fire show as a music supervisor. And, I did a Pump Boys and Dinettes in Kansas City, actually, at the New Theater. So I'm kind of, I like doing that.
Got it down.
And then, well, I know kind of what it takes and what I can and cannot do.
Yeah.
But then, Colin brought, they were going to turn it into to a movie, like a movie of the week. And he brought the executive producer, Leslie Greif, down to see me play, because he's like, you should get this guy to do, he did the Broadway show. You should get him to do the TV show version of it. And so he brought me down to see me play down this place on Broad called the Acme Feed and Seed. And Leslie and I hit it off, and he's like, "Are you going to come down?" And he'd also just gotten done filming the show called Texas Rising. I don't know if you ever saw it.
No.
It was about the Battle of San Jacinto after the Alamo, and they had this big premiere in San Antonio. And he's like, "I'm gonna fly you guys down." So he flew us down, and we played the big premiere of Texas Rising. And we got to meet Bill Paxton, and we backed up Jose Feliciano and Chris Christopherson to the show. And we played at the Alamo, not a club called the Alamo.
The Alamo.
At the fucking Alamo. Yeah. Wow. It was pretty spectacular. It was nice. It was a nice time.
That's great.
And that's how I got the gig for what became Sun Records.
Sun Records, yeah.
And, I wish we'd have got it. Well, I was just talking to Colin about that. We were hoping that we were going to get a second season of that. They did 6 episodes, and, they Hollywooded it up a little bit, but it looked beautiful because it was Bill Wages as the director of photography, who's incredible. And I ended up doing a film with him called Neon Highway. But the director was Roland Joffe. I mean,
wow.
Oscar nominated director I was working with, and I learned how to do that. And I recorded all the music here in Nashville, but then I would record it I would hire real musicians to play on set so that they could have good sound. And I did Pro Tools on set, and they used a lot of the live music.
Wow.
Which is that's not really done in movies. But we did it, and it worked, and they all loved what I did because it looks real. Because I hired real Memphis musicians to play the instruments that they're supposed to be playing, and I had them learn the song the way we recorded them, and then we would play them parts of it live and within the scene, so that it looked, they had choices. Anyway, it was an excellent experience, and I lived in Memphis for 4 months.
Not a bad gig.
It was great. We all stayed at the Chiska Hotel, which is now made into some rustic condominiums. And I don't know if that resonates with you, but the Chiska Hotel was this rundown hotel in Memphis right off of Beale Street, where in one of the floors of the Chiska was the radio station that Dewey Phillips played the first Elvis record ever. Ah. So it was extraordinary juju on that account.
Well, as if you weren't busy enough, you host Face the Music with Chuck Mead, a radio show on, on 6:50 a.m.? WSM,
the Air Castle of the South.
You kind of came full circle back on AM radio, like your family roots.
Yeah, I love it. I've had a lot of people. I've been doing it since 2018, and feel like I'm getting by with something. I've outstayed a couple of different music directors there. But yeah, it's a cool show. It's it's an interview show, but really it's just a couple of people sitting around playing records. And it's mostly that. I mean, it's not some sort of hard-hitting interview. Of course, I talk to people, about their interesting lives. But I've had some good people on, man. I've had, Marty was on the show, Marty Stewart.
Nice.
And Carlene has been on the show. I had Billy Swan on the show.
Oh,
Billy Swan he's one of the coolest guys ever. And, some of your, Elizabeth Cook came on and did a Catch from Old Crow. Yeah, I've had a bunch of different variety of people.
Very cool. All right, Chuck. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, man. See ya.
See ya. Bye.
I am a straight shooting, fast talking man. To all the WOMEN. My love machine is
Thanks for tuning in to Frets with DJ Faye. If you like the show, you can subscribe for free at most podcast platforms. Hope you'll join me again next time. Stay tuned.
Yeah, that's what we do.
That's what you guys do.